What's a vampire? It's one of those questions like define a table, define a horse, define a woman, that seems simple enough at first, but when you start to think about all the ambiguities and edge cases, it becomes far more complex. The fact that vampires aren't real and only come to us through wildly different stories means that it's even harder to pin down. Is it only drinking blood that makes someone a vampire? Can they go out in the sun? Dracula can. Edward Cullen sparkles. Is a person a vampire because of a set of characteristics, some checkboxes that can be ticked off? Or are they a vampire because of what they do, a role they play in the narrative? So how can the statement, the blood angels are vampires, have any meaning? Can they be meaningfully called vampires when there are literal vampires in a 40k setting? Was Sanguinius, their Primarch, a vampire? Let's start with him. Sanguinius was, like his 21 other brothers, who included 2 lost Primarchs and a 2-for-1 special of Alpharius Omegon, a Primarch. He was created by the Emperor of Mankind, an immortal, all-powerful, perhaps evil super being, to be one of his generals as the Emperor spread his imperium across the galaxy. At the tip of the spear were the Adeptus Astartes. You probably know what the deal is with them, even if you only know them as Space Marines. Sanguinius led a legion of Astartes, initially known as the Revenant Legion. The Revenants were unusually bloodthirsty even amongst the other Astartes. They were only deployed on the worst kind of battles, where they could get up close to the enemy in close combat. They were deployed to war zones like Neptune, where they lost 12,000 warriors to something in the tunnels under Neptune's moons, and they had to recruit pretty much anybody they could find to make up their numbers. Like the War Dogs, who go on to become the World Eaters, they weren't well liked by their higher-ups, especially since they had some nasty rumours following them around. People said that the Revenant Legion were eating their fallen enemies after battles, and given what they would go on to become, that was probably true. Half a galaxy away, the infant Sanguinius crash-landed on the moon of Bar Secundus. The 2 moons of the planet Bar had been scoured by nuclear weapons millennia before, and there were very few people there who weren't mutated. Sanguinius was found by the Folk of the Pure Blood, or just the Blood, who were essentially human supremacists, one of the few factions on the planet who were still human. They almost killed baby Sanguinius because he had a pair of wings, but essentially he had just too good vibes. He has 10 million plus aura at all times. People just can't help liking him. On the battlefield, on the other hand, he was no angel. He was a ferocious killer, especially when defending the people he cared about. Like many Primarchs, he united the planet he crash-landed on through extreme violence and was beginning to make it a better place. Aside from the wings, Sanguinius is a strong psyker. Not on the level of Magnus, but definitely stronger than Guilliman, Perturabo, psychic wardrobes. Like his brother Conrad Kurz, Sanguinius conceived visions of the future, and he saw the Emperor's arrival. His first meeting was brief and amicable. Biggie asked to join him, Sangi asked what would happen if he refused, Biggie said that he wouldn't refuse, Sangi said fair enough. He didn't join his legion right away. Despite being superhumanly chill, he didn't really understand the ways of the Imperium and had grown up basically feral. He needed to be acclimated to life in Biggie's murder machine, and who better for that than his brother Horus? Sanguinius and Horus were like instant best friends.
Did we just become best friends? Yup! Do you want to go do karate in the garage? Yup!
And they spent the next 3 years together becoming the best of best friends. At some point, Horus discovered Sanguinius' secret. He could enter bloodthirsty rages in which he was almost completely out of control, and his sons were no better. This could have been something that would doom him and his legion, but Horus kept it secret. This flaw in Sanguinius and everyone who had come to bear his gene seed was called the Red Thirst, and it's where the whole vampire thing comes from. All blood angels tend to be pale, and they can do that thing when they pop their fangs in that cool way vampires do, but they also have an overwhelming thirst for blood. This gets especially bad during combat, reaching the point that Sanguinius or his Sanguini Guard would have to put down a battle brother who became completely lost in the thirst. This, incidentally, is one of 2 ways in which a blood angel can become a frothing madman. Sanguinius was working on a cure for the Red Thirst when the Horus heresy broke out. Horus didn't even try to convert Sanguinius to his cause. There was no point. Golden Boy was just too pure. Instead, shortly before the heresy came to be public knowledge, he sent Sangi and his legion to the planet Cygnus, where they were attacked by demons. Sanguinius went toe-to-toe with a greater demon of Khorne, Ka'Bandha, who'll come back later, and he nearly died in the process. When he defeated Ka'Bandha, another demon showed up to give Sanguinius a choice. Sacrifice himself and the Red Verse would be cured. You know Golden Boy was just about to take one for the team, but one of the Legion's apothecaries got there first, and became something known as the Red Angel, who we'll come back to in another video. And I'm going to skip over a lot of the Imperium Secundus stuff, because, again, it deserves its own video, except to say that when his brothers thought the Emperor was dead, they immediately made Sanguinius the second Emperor. I'll also skip his pilgrimage to Davin, the planet where Horus turned to chaos, except to say that throughout the course of the Horus heresy, Sanguinius' rage was getting worse, and he was experiencing visions of his own death that would cause symptoms of what would one day be called the Black Rage. During the Siege of Terror, Sanguinius was basically MVP. He personally led the defence of the Eternity Gate, the entrance to the Emperor's throne room. He started that defence by decapitating a Titan, and then held down the gate single-handed for days. Ka'Bandha turned up again, and Sanguinius broke his back, knocked him out of the air and down into a pack of demons who turned on him and ate him. He's a demon obviously, so he got better, but it's still gnarly. Then he fought his brother Angron, who by that time was Demon Prince of Khorne. Angron, who we'll cover in a later episode because he is just tragic, is essentially Sanguinius gone wrong. He had the ability to be every bit as empathetic and charismatic as Sanguinius, but he was given cranial implants that caused him constant pain and anger. He never really had a chance to be a good person, and the Emperor didn't help. Are we really supposed to believe that the greatest genius in the galaxy couldn't find a way to remove these butcher's nails from his head? Sanguinius won their duel by ripping out said butcher's nails and exploding Angron's head. Again, he's a demon, so it's not permanent, but still. During the fight, Sanguinius had been impaled by Angron's black blade, and he was in no condition to fight any further. But when it was time to board Horus's flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, to finish Horus and his eponymous heresy, Sanguinius insisted on joining the attack. He told the Emperor that he had foreseen his own death at Horus's hands, and instead of running from it, which was absolutely an option, he ran straight into it in an attempt to change the future. Again, we have to question what Big E's stance on this was. Was he okay with one of his sons going to fight a chaos-upgraded Horus while he was mortally wounded? Why didn't he want somebody as beloved as Sanguinius to stay alive to lead the Imperium after his own death? If you were a child growing up in the Imperium, then 1, sorry, and B, this is the part of the story you'd have heard 1,000 times but still beg your parents to tell you again. Sanguinius was separated from the rest of the boarding party when they teleported to the Vengeful Spirit, and he was the first to find Horus. Horus let Sanguinius reach him, in one final bid to turn him, and this really shows how far gone Horus was by this point, since there was no possible way, after everything that had happened, that Sanguinius was just going to switch sides. Even if he wasn't the most loyal of the Emperor's sons, he knew that the heresy was effectively over by this point. Sanguinius was heavily injured, but attacked Horus all the same, and even wounded, he was a match for his brother, until Horus unleashed the full extent of his chaos-enhanced power. He battered his brother with his maul, World Breaker, and skewered him with his talons. When Sanguinius died, that really was it for Horus. If there was ever a point at which he was too far gone, it was now. Just as Fulgrim realised that he had gone too far when he had killed Ferrus Manus. It's what happens next that's interesting. Astartes can feel the death of their Primarch, and the Bloody Angels are still feeling it. Sanguinius' death was experienced by every surviving Blood Angel, and it's still psychically reverberating through them to this day. The Blood Angel stock of gene seed was lost during the heresy, and it had to be reconstituted from the dead Sanguinius' body. Yes, sperm jacking exists in the 40k universe. This gene seed carries Sanguinius' memories, and 10,000 years later, if a Blood Angel ever fully gives in to the Red First, then they enter a state called the Black Rage, from which there is no coming back. In the Black Rage, a Blood Angel believes that they are Sanguinius, living his final moments on the Vengeful Spirit. Every enemy in front of them is Horus, and they will fight like madmen. These lost brothers are put into a unique unit to the Blood Angels and their successors called the Death Company. In all black armour with red X's because they're straight edge, to represent the wounds Sanguinius suffered, they aren't so much deployed as unleashed on the enemy. Today, Blood Angels make up a small fraction of the overall number of Astartes, but they're one of the most significant chapters in the lore and on the tabletop. Every edition since 2nd, they've had their own codex, and the range has recently been refreshed with some controversial new models. Oh, and a captain who's objectively worse than just a regular captain. In the lore, the 41st Millennia Blood Angels are a mostly codex compliant chapter. They stick to the standard 1,000-man makeup of a chapter, but they have their own unique units like the aforementioned Death Company and the Sanguinary Guard, who are absolute most elite unit of any given chapter, who go into battle in Sanguinius' death mask. They used to have Librarian Dreadnoughts and Bar-Pattern Predators, but now they just don't. Like the other legions who were broken up in the aftermath of heresy, the Blood Angels have a number of successor chapters, some of which, like the Flesh Tearers and the Flesh Eaters, have been part of the setting since Rogue Trader. Their successors are pretty interesting, and despite having the one defining genetic flaw, they're pretty varied. The Knights of Blood, for example, were declared traitors for being so uncompromisingly brutal, while the Lamenters did something to cure the Red Thirst and Black Rage, but it's left them both prone to major depression and chronically unlucky, to the point that the chapter has been wiped out several times. The Atlantean Spears are especially psychic, while the Flesh Tearers, who's the chapter I play on the tabletop for my sins, are badly afflicted by the Red Thirst, to the point that they're very close to being excommunicated like the Knights of Blood. Plenty of them have their own books. The Flesh Tearers were pretty much the successor chapter, promoted to full chapter status like the Black Templars throughout much of the later editions, until in 10th edition they were deleted completely. R.I.P. my boy, Gabriel. It's the characters where they really shine though. The chapter itself is led by Commander Dante. The Blood Angels always call their chapter master Commander. He's one of the oldest living Astartes at over 1500 years old, and he, like many vampires, just wants to die. He can't really admit that to himself because that would basically be heresy, but it's always there. Being able to stave off the Red Thirst for so long is a literal miracle, one of many attributed to Dante. He started having visions of the Sanguinor, the chapter's mysterious saviour figure, when he was just a boy on Baal Secundus. Then there's Mephiston, probably one of the most powerful psychics in the galaxy. He's also one of the only Blood Angels who's managed to come back from the Black Rage. See, he was just a regular librarian named Callisterius, who fought with a chapter on the world of Armageddon, which is probably going to get about 5 videos. He fell to the Rage and was put into the Death Company. But when he was crushed beneath an entire fucking hive city, he clawed his way out, totally cured of the Black Rage, and now going by Mephiston. As Mephiston, he isn't just insanely powerfully psychic, but physically coming close to like Primarch levels of speed and strength. So why don't all the other Blood Angels just do whatever he did and become an unstoppable super chapter? It's because Mephiston isn't saying what he did to beat the Black Rage, and that means it's likely to be something bad. The fact that he now goes by a name that's very close to Mephistopheles, the demon that Faust sells his soul to in Goethe's drama, it's probably not a good sign. While the Ultramarines and their successors might be the most numerous and effective chapters, the Blood Angels are perhaps the most beloved. A big part of that is leftover Riz of their Primarch, and next to the Emperor he is the most worshipped figure in the Imperial Pantheon, with shrines on every civilized world and even his own holiday, Sanguinalia, which is like 40k Christmas. They've also shown themselves to be faultlessly self-sacrificing, constantly coming close to being annihilated as a chapter. However, on the worlds where they operate, people have a tendency to turn up dead with a couple of holes in their neck, and less blood than is medically advisable. They won't turn on their allies like the Flesh Tearers, but they still need blood. And when you're fighting things whose blood is acid, or who don't have blood at all, a lone guardsman pulling guard duty late at night is going to look pretty inviting. Read some Blood Angels books, and the fact that they have these vampiric tendencies is barely mentioned, if at all. The Black Rage, this psychic sword of Damocles constantly above all their heads, seems to be more interesting to Black Library writers. The Red First has been relegated to a game mechanic. In 10th edition, they get 2+ to strength and 1 extra attack when they charge. You know, like Dracula. But I think their vampiric nature is interesting, maybe even the most interesting thing about them. Vampire myths are old, maybe some of the oldest and most prevalent myths, but the vampire myth became what it is today throughout the 18th and 19th century in Europe. It's no coincidence that the myth of blood-sucking aristocrats emerged at the same time as capitalism. When John William Polidori wrote The Vampire, the aristocracy was beginning its long descent into irrelevance. The capitalist class was in the ascendant, the first republics had been declared, and new political theories like anarchism and socialism were being promulgated. Polidori was Lord Byron's personal physician, a man of learning who made his money by helping people, whereas his employer was lazy, privileged, seductive, and corrupting. Byron even published the first edition of The Vampire under his own name. Polidori's vampire, who's likely based on Byron, was different from what we'd consider to be a vampire today. He killed with a knife instead of his teeth, for instance, and he had few, if any, supernatural powers. But the book established a vibe that's still being followed to this day. A vampire is charming, sexual, refined, but ultimately a plague on the society he moves within. He is somebody who takes, giving nothing back, a leech. Bram Stoker's Dracula pushes this further. The Count is clearly of old world aristocratic blood, but when Jonathan Harker meets him in the late Victorian era, he's dissolute. There are no servants in his castle. Dracula has to serve Harker himself. His castle isn't opulent, but nearly bare. Dracula's only interest is in acquiring property in London. He has no body, no shadow. He doesn't even seem to enjoy killing, but he's driven by a desire to turn others into commodities for his own consumption. He's a capitalist. In his book Capitalism, A Horror Story, John Greenaway tries to complicate this straightforward reading of Dracula. He brings in other readings, showing how Dracula is anti-work and utopian. Because of his wealth, Dracula doesn't have to work. How does Dracula get what he needs? Not through work. Rather, the Count can simply satisfy his lack in a straightforward and immediate manner, and as a result he's met with disgust for his ability to do so without working. Think about the kinds of vampires we see in fiction. There are straightforward aristocrats like Dracula, later Lestat and Louis, who live in luxury thanks to their property and stock portfolios. Then at the other end of the scale there's the bums and drifters, the white trash vampires in Near Dark, who wander from town to town, never really part of a legitimate economy. There's the bohemian vampires in Only Lovers Left Alive, forever just hanging out. However they're portrayed, vampires always show our anxiety that somewhere somebody is having fun, and they haven't earned it like we have. While we're toiling away at our email jobs, they sleep all day, party all night, and never grow old. Just like 40k is simultaneously a satire of fascism and a way of enjoying it without having to put on jackboots, the vampire myth allows us to tut at all these lazy blood drinkers while also imagining that we could be as free as they are. Outside of the vampire myth, aren't so many of our favourite shows about people who don't seem to work, who are somehow allowed to satisfy their base desires with no consequences? This is why I think the vampire part of the Blood Angels gets de-emphasised. They can't be that kind of vampire. Although they may enjoy art and cultural pursuits, they are, at the end of the day, soldiers. Things like duty and honour are integral to who they are, and those just aren't compatible with the vampire myth. There are vampires in 40k, the rogue traders, move from world to world, surrounded by endless luxury, unbound by social norms. The Blood Angels may have some nods to the vampire myth, but like Sanguinius, they're just too good. We can't live out our vampire fantasies through them. They've always been my favourite chapter. I remember drawing a picture of one of their tactical marines when I was so young, I wrote their name as Bold Angles. That they're constantly having to fight with their darker aspects makes for great stories, and now they're placed on the wrong side of the Great Rift, there's plenty of chances for them to engage in action that the Codex definitely would not approve of in the name of holding the bad half of the galaxy together. All that's missing, I think, is a connection with the myth that inspired them.